During Emperor Hirohito Showa's rule starting in 1926, Japan took a turn towards ultranationalism and militarism where they began attacking all of their neighboring Asian countries. Japan began taking control of areas such as Indochina, Manchuria, Korea, and Thailand, slowly working their way up in power until they eventually took on China. This started the First Sino-Japanese War, which took place in 1894 and lasted until 1895. For 50 years from that point, they absorbed Asian and Pacific Island territories, and in less than half a century, their territory grew from 147,669 square miles to more than 1 million. Japan was suffering from the Showa Depression lasting through years 1930 to 1932 due to the global Great Depression, Black Thursday, and the Minsei Party's adoption of the deflationary policy. The zaibatsu played a large part in Japan's economy. Zaibatsu, meaning money and wealth, refers to large family-owned banking and industrial conglomerates or combines. A single family owned a combination of many large corporations through stockholding companies. The big four Japanese families that owned these businesses were Mitsui, Mitsubishi, Sumitomo, and Yasuda, because Japan required raw resources not abundant in their land in order to feed the large conglomerate zaibatsu, leading them to expanding to nearby Asian countries that had these supplies. This became one of the reasons why zaibatsu was associated with Japan's militarism. Japan signed the tripartite with Fascist Italy and Nazi Germany that if either of them were attacked by a nation not already involved in the war, they would assist. As soon as the United States got involved, Emperor Showa agreed to fight them. They flew planes over Pearl Harbor, killing nearly 2,500 men. The US declared war.
No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory.
By 1944, they realized victory was unlikely, yet they kept fighting up until Hiroshima and Nagasaki's bombing. By 1945, Showa broadcasted Japan's surrender.
世界の体制と帝国の現状とに鑑み、非常の措置をもって自局を収集せんと。
From this point forward, the US had made it their goal to rebuild Japan into their image of a proper society. This included abolishing previous ideas that seemed harmful and replacing them with ideas such as democracy. Our Job in Japan was a short military training film made for the soldiers that would be a part of the occupation to watch. It is regarded as propaganda due to the video being filmed with a strong American bias. However, the film gives insight into the American perspective of Japan shortly before they would occupy the nation. Near the beginning of the video, it begins with a statement of their main idea that the soldiers would need to know going forward.
Are problems in the brain inside of the Japanese head. There are 70 million of these in Japan. Physically no different than any other brains in the world. Actually all made of exactly the same stuff as ours. These brains, like our brains, can do good things or bad things, all depending on the kind of ideas that are put inside. We're here to make it clear to the Japanese that their time has now come to make sense. Modern, civilized sense. That is our job in Japan.
Due to the context being right after the events of World War II and the tragedy of Pearl Harbor, it can be assumed that the Americans had a very negative perspective of the Japanese. And due to the fact that the nation of Japan had isolated itself for centuries, they knew little to nothing about the people. Therefore, a statement that reassures that they were the same as Americans was deemed necessary to address. Upon MacArthur's arrival in Japan, the man who would be orchestrating the entire process of rebuilding, he was certainly accepted. In fact, he was adored.
MacArthur was like a force of nature. He was like the river that flows or the wind that blows. Very few people thought of MacArthur as the enemy.
The well-known picture of MacArthur and Emperor Showa was taken when Showa paid his respects to MacArthur. The image became a symbol for MacArthur and Showa's new rules and the unity of the nations. The situation of Japan was that there was widespread famine, no food to eat, and many were unemployed. So, when there was the opportunity to change to democracy, the Japanese were willing to make the change as they realized their previous system wasn't working for them anymore. Because of Zaibatsu's imbalance of power leaning towards the big businesses, there was a lack of freedom of expression for the people that didn't have power, such as women, workers, and intellectuals. Japanese war criminals were punished, and Zaibatsu was broken into keiretsu because Zaibatsu was viewed as a hotbed of militarism. MacArthur assigned the government section of SCAP to draft the constitution for Japan in 6 days, which would be presented to the Japanese government, presented to the Diet, and finally presented to the people. The contents of the constitution declared things such as the rights of women, freedom of expression, and the permanent change of the emperor's rule going forward. As it was presented to the Japanese government, they were shocked and in no way did they agree with the changes. But with the election drawing near and the citizens of Japan's support of the new constitution, they didn't have much of a choice. So, they presented it as the final draft. With the new constitution in place, the effects of the Japanese freedom of expression gave birth to new entertainment. Songs, movies, and dances were created as people exercised their creative freedom. Shigeru Yoshida, the Japanese prime minister, came to Japan to make a deal for Japan's independence, while America wanted Japan to rearm and side with America during the Cold War. The peace treaty ensured that the Japanese would get their political freedom, while the Americans could keep their military bases on their land. However, there were concerns with this treaty, such as the Japanese concern that America would drag them into another war. After the occupation, Japan went through a great economic growth, more commonly known as the economic miracle. The effort of recovering the industries from 1946 to 1954 were successful, and many of the industries such as the cotton, coal, and steel industry started back up. From this point, the economy began steadily increasing, and Japan became one of the most well-developed nations. One of the greatest influences of this success being the Ministry of International Trade and Industry implemented in 1949. Showa Hirohito was not actually tried as a war criminal due to the complications it may have caused. So, for the next 37 years of his life, he spent his time working in the background. This was because of the new constitution being in place, meaning his power would be minimal compared to the power of elected representatives. His death in 1989 is known to be the longest imperial rule in Japan, with a total of almost 64 years. Today, many of the companies and corporations that have origins in Zaibatsu are standalone businesses, but these origins are recognizable as many of them have kept their family names. It is also argued that the qualities of old mechanisms and financial control that came with Zaibatsu have been destroyed after its eradication. We can conclude that the 7-year occupation period had undoubtable value, not just to Japan, but to America as well, as both nations have built a strong relationship as an outcome of these events. They've shown a cooperation and consideration for what is fair, and while it can be argued that America has forced its values of democracy as it wished to mold Japan to become like itself, these values were still something that Japan was open to accepting, and the changes that come from the rebuilding of their society, such as the freedom of expression, can be agreed on as a change for the better that has still remained in place today.